Hey everyone, welcome to our SFI biweekly briefing on Tuesdays at 2. Today is a very special episode because we have a special guest. So I am Sarah Streyder, the Executive Director here at SFI, and this is my dear friend and colleague, Heba, the 2022 AFI Air Force Spouse of the Year. Heba, welcome. Thank you for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I'm excited about today's conversation. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but policy nerds, we think this is a lot of fun. So this is our fun time of year. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Heba Abdelaal, and yes, I'm the 2022 AFI Air Force Spouse of the Year. So excited. During the Air Force's 75th birthday year, there's been a lot of great things to talk about and a lot more to come as the year goes on, celebratory events. So if you are an Air Force spouse, or if you're an Air Force family member, or even just a member of the military or military family, right? I really encourage you to participate in any of those events as they come to a place near you. So please help us celebrate our 75 years of existence here in the United States. And in more to introduce myself, I know we're going to talk a little bit about policy stuff today, and I'll just say, for about 9 years, I was a congressional staffer, and I got to work on a lot of this stuff, right, day in and day out. And so I'm particularly excited about today's update and talking with you a little bit more about the inner workings of Capitol Hill.
Yes, Heba's expertise extends far beyond the Air Force specifically. We have her here for, like you said, nerd. I have my nerd glasses on for the nerdiness of the topic, definitely. Today we are doing a special dive on what's both nerdy or sexy to some as a topic, the NDAA. So, Heba, NDAA, as we've touched on in these briefings, stands for the National Defense Authorization Act. This is a big, huge annual bill that has to do with Department of Defense money and policy. Which again, we've touched on briefly before, but quick review for any new folks who might be in the audience. Heba, could you quickly review why this bill is so important? And perhaps also why this bill is different from, say, an appropriations bill, which is another term that we hear a lot about, because it also has to do with DoD money.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm absolutely glad to. So you may or may not have ever heard the term or phrase congressional defense committees, right? And there are there are 4 of these committees total, 2 on either side of Capitol Hill, 2 in the House, 2 in the Senate. One is called the House Armed Services Committee. One's called the Senate Armed Services Committee, where the NDAA takes place. Work on the NDAA occurs, right? They have jurisdiction over that piece of legislation. And you also have the House Appropriations Committee on Defense and the Senate Appropriations Committee on Defense. And really the easiest way I like to describe the difference in the jurisdiction of both of those, each of those committees is the Armed Services Committees really are basically like giving you your credit limit. Like you are authorized to spend X amount of money on whatever project, whatever function, whatever program, right? Whereas the Appropriations Committee is like, hey, your mom is sending you to the movies and gives you $20 in your hand, and now you have that $20 to spend. You know what I mean? So the authorizing committees, the armed services committees, are the ones who are primarily responsible, obviously, for the NDAA. And then the appropriations committee will work alongside them to make sure that those programs and those functions that are authorized are actually funded or have the money behind them, the resources behind them to take place. So right now we are actually in the middle of all 4 of those committees doing their annual work. Both the Armed Services Committees and Appropriations Committees are like heads down working on these bills. And today we're going to talk about NDAA, right? So it's a great time to be talking about that because the House Armed Services Committee tomorrow is actually going to be marking up at the full committee level, right, their annual defense policy bill, their annual NDAA. And for people who don't know this, Sarah, the awesome thing about the NDAA, actually awesome, right? And I say this like in the nerdiest sense possible. The awesome thing about the NDAA is it's passed for 61 consecutive years, right? So every year Congress reviews all of these bills and considers all of these different pieces of legislation. Some get passed in the House, some only get passed in the Senate, some don't really go anywhere, right? Some only get a committee review or a committee hearing. But the NDAA is really one of those very unique pieces of legislation that is passed actually on an annual basis. And like you said, it covers an entire breadth of policy issues that affect the military community directly. So it has language in there for military spouses like you and me, has language in there for military dependents or children, right, on education. And it has language in there generally that impact military members and their families with regards to basic allowance for housing, the basic needs allowance, which we'll talk a little bit more about too. But it really, it covers a very wide variety, right, of issues. And then of course, the foreign policy issues that you and I both care about and talk about at length.
Yeah, we do.
So,
as everyone should, really.
As everyone should. It's actually super important. So
well, I love, first of all, love the credit limit money budget. Great, simple, easy to understand explanation. And yeah, we refer to it casually as a must pass bill, which means it also, tell me if this is correct, runs the risk of becoming a Christmas tree bill, right? Where everyone tries to tack on all their ornaments because they know it's legislation that's going to move. So if you have a priority you care about, instead of wishing on a hopeful star that maybe your bill will move, you're like, well, just tack it onto this thing because it's got momentum. So that can make this bill really cool because it enacts all the changes that we care about, but also it's huge. And to your point, we're in budget season. So if you know a congressional staffer on these committees, buy them coffee, please. They will love you forever.
Or at least just check in on them and make sure they're actually sleeping, or, just make sure that they're okay. All right, everybody, just,
self-care.
Be kind to them. Yes, self-care is super important.
So where it's at right now, tell me if I've got this right. So the Senate Armed Services Committee did its markup last week, right? So they have their kind of final, is it the final draft or the chairman's markup? Is that the term that would use? And they've basically voted it out of committee to the floor. Is that correct?
Yes, and the Senate works. So the Senate is, and full disclosure, I spent most of my time in the Senate, so I'm a Senate brat. I get it. I Senate snob is what they would call it. Fine, but yeah. So the Senate has completed their markup. The Senate works a little bit differently in the sense that they actually traditionally don't release their chairman's mark until they have floor time, right, in the Senate. And so usually staff to members who are not on the Senate Armed Services Committee, they will have an idea and a sense, right, of maybe what's going to come up in the chairman's mark, but they don't really get to fully see that until it's time to go to the floor and actually work on it as a full body. It's very different than the House, which tomorrow, if anyone's interested, at house.gov, you can actually watch the House Armed Services Committee consider their full mark, and all the members will be there. And it's a marathon markup evening. Sometimes it goes into really late hours of the night. You have members that bring up amendments, justify, advocate for those amendments in front of the full committee, and then the committee takes votes on those amendments throughout the evening. So it's a little bit different. The two committees process their bills just a little bit differently. And then, of course, once each body passes their respective piece of, the NDAA or their version of the NDAA, they'll go to conference and reconcile any differences between the two.
But that becomes so closed door of a process. I think this is more the fun part, right? Because it's more transparent. You get to actually see where, at least if they are a committee member who gets the chance to weigh in at this level, where they stand and what they have to say. And it can be really entertaining. I say that without irony in my voice, truly, as someone who's watched many a C-SPAN for many an hour of a committee markup. You might be pleasantly surprised every once in a while by bipartisan consensus that comes up every once in a while. Don't bank on it, but
it's rare by the day. But the good thing, I think, that we're really fortunate, as military family members, is actually that there's a tremendous amount of bipartisan consensus when it comes to military quality of life issues, right? So yeah, when we're talking about childcare, we're talking about, housing, and we're talking about the challenges that we faced, right, with privatized housing, or even what we're seeing with Red Hill, right, the Red Hill fuel facility, and a lot of the contamination that unfortunately is being, still uncovered there. There's a lot of consensus there across the board, across, both sides of the aisle, that those are responsibilities that the department really needs to own up, and embrace. And so you'll see a lot of language on Red Hill specifically in this particular year's piece of legislation, just to try to help and support those families that are impacted. Yeah, it's been a huge lift. And so the good thing is that, there's so many spouses, right? And so many military affiliated organizations that are a part of these conversations and this process. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, right? Because we're ultimately the ones that are living the life, right? Most readily. And so we are seeing the impact of these decisions very, very in our day-to-day, day-to-day life and the day-to-day life of our spouses, right? As they do their work. And so it's good when military affiliated organizations and military family members get that chance to be a part of that process.
Absolutely. And to that end, we wanted to flag for folks some of the provisions that you and I thought are especially relevant to folks in our community, that they would be interested in monitoring, not only kind of the status as it goes, but then hopefully if they get passed in final versions, the execution, the implementation, right? So I know that in the Senate version, or the mysterious, what we've led to believe is this non-public Senate version, I believe reporting indicates it should include a troop salary increase, which should make everyone in our audience happy, as well as an increase to the basic needs allowance that you brought up, Heba, which is super important for food security purposes and access. And then I think in the House version, the two things that I was seeing so far is, first of all, consideration that drone pilots should be getting similar mental health support to non-drone other pilots, given the hidden toll that those decisions and those jobs can have on those service members. I think I also saw reporting that there should be some additional annual reporting requirements to Congress from housing providers to hopefully increase transparency and accountability. So those are a couple examples. Any other ones you want to flag or add so far?
Yeah, well, so I'll say usually you don't see authorizing provisions or policy provisions, right, in the appropriations bills, but there were a couple of exceptions this year in the House Defense Appropriations Bill. And those couple of examples that I will flag for y'all are, there is a reporting requirement, or basically like an encouragement by the committee, right? Recognizing the need for comprehensive data measuring military spouse employment. And the committee is really encouraging the Department of Defense, in collaboration with the Department of Labor, right? The Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, to really wrap their arms around, like, what are great survey questions and what are the data points that we actually need to understand what the status is of the true, like, metrics, right, of what military spouse employment actually looks like. So military spouses that live overseas like me, right, or our friend Vinny, military spouses that live stateside but maybe have a really specialized occupation, or one that's like, requires certification, licensure, all of those types of things. So I think that is definitely a provision to watch out for, and one that I'd actually be really surprised if we didn't see something similar on the Senate side. And so I'm really excited about that, because I think it's important that we all at least count the same way, right, when it comes to these things. So everyone kind of keep that in mind. And then the second provision that's really, really interesting is actually on childcare. And again, the committee just recognizing that this is an ongoing stressor for military families. I think we've seen this come up now in the top 5 stressors for military families in the Blue Star Families surveys, right? So we've seen this come up really consistently as a challenge. And I think the committees and the congressional defense committees are just really encouraging the Department of Defense to embrace best practices. Best practices they see in the civilian communities, best practices that they're seeing at different installations, best practices that they're seeing at installations that have really specialized or unique mission sets, like drone pilots, right? Shift work, things where families might be more challenged, right? Dual military families, all of those, different and unique circumstances that a family might face that would make childcare even more challenging than just capacity. So those are really the two big provisions that I would say we've seen in the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, Mark, for this year, that I'm really, really hoping will stick, throughout this entire markup and review process.
Particularly that conference process, right? That's the most where the most things magically disappear.
Conference is tough. Conference is
man.
conference is a battle. So gotta get in there.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for those updates. And, I think similarly, of similar importance is flagging things that aren't yet in these bills, but maybe things that folks still care about. And it's not too late, which is to say, right, this is just the committee stage and getting that markup through. But then once they're at the floor of each chamber, they can get amended from there. And that's where the real battle royale begins, right? And so for SFI's purposes, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we've talked over and over again on our briefings about the 2002 Iraq War authorization, right? This is the authorization where Congress said, President, you can take us to war with Iraq following 9/11. It is an authorization that we no longer need on the books. It doesn't support any ongoing operations, but keeping it on the books is a risk of our families of being spontaneously sent into conflict without there being congressional war powers that we all really want for that transparency and that deliberation. So this is an AUMF we've been trying to repeal for a while. And the hope and the expectation is that both chambers will have a floor amendment to repeal that AUMF during this NDAA fight. So we have yet to get a sense of how likely it is either will pass, but we have an expectation that'll be there. So stay tuned, folks, for that. What's another issue, Heba, that I know you care about deeply that's not in this NDAA, but perhaps should, perhaps could, or even on its own is something we should all be paying attention to this year?
Oh, that was such a softball. Thank you. Thank you for laying that up for me, Sarah. Got to talk about the work opportunity tax credit. Okay. For military spouses. My goodness, the grassroots effort that has gone behind getting this work opportunity tax credit expansion to include military spouses as a target group. There has been I just cannot even believe the immense amount of grassroots, again, effort that has come behind this. It's incredible. You have employers now, right? Like actual employers that are either part of the military spouse employment partnership program, right, at the DoD level, or employers just across the country that are like, oh, I have a military spouse that I have employed and I would love to keep them employed. How can I do that? And what opportunities are there for me to do that? Well, the work opportunity tax credit is a federal tax credit that is currently available to employers to support all sorts of communities and other populations in our country, right, who experience challenges and barriers consistently, right, in the workforce. And when it comes to employment, and military spouses certainly meet all of that criteria, right? So currently target work groups include, ex-felons who are being rehabilitated into society, veterans, summer youth hires, right? So short-term, right, summer youth hires, there for those 3 months of summer. If an employer hires them, they are allowed to claim a tax credit for having hired or employed that individual. And all that we are trying to do, all that this piece of legislation does, and I'm going to give everyone the 2 bill numbers. So, prepare yourselves, pull up a note on your iPhone, do whatever you got to do. But really, this piece of legislation, the Military Spouse Hiring Act, what it does is it just establishes military spouses as a target work group under the federal work opportunity tax credit. And that bill number in the House is HR 2974. And in the Senate is S 3909. And so go online to congress.gov, type in HR 2974 or S 3909, and you can see who the co-sponsors are on that legislation. You don't need any periods. You don't even have to capitalize. It's not case sensitive. And so just go on there, go look and see. You will not believe, as of last week, the end of last week, Sarah, we had 149 co-sponsors on the House side. I mean, talk about bipartisan, right? Like you never see that many members of Congress support anything, literally anything. So this is such a unique opportunity. And just for the sense of urgency, my call to action that I will leave you all with is, this may not apply to you today, but someday you might be that spouse who's looking for that job. And that employer can say, you know what? I can hire this military spouse. I can give them that opportunity, right, to further their career or to start a career. And it will financially incentivize them to do so and really take away this argument that it costs too much to onboard a military spouse if they're going to leave the workforce in 2 or 3 years or leave that particular position. So please, 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 everyone, It's not a part of the NDAAs yet. And even if it's not, right, it's a standalone piece of legislation that has a lot of support behind it. And do it for yourself, do it for your fellow military spouses. This employment issue is really important, especially when we're talking about some of the challenges that military families are facing with pay, with food insecurity, with housing, and with childcare. So please be sure to call your congressman, call your senator if you don't see their name as a co-sponsor, and really encourage them to support this piece of legislation. It's really important and would go a long way toward addressing some of the military spouse unemployment issues we're seeing.
And we don't want to lose the momentum we have this year. We want to get it passed while we still got all these co-sponsors. Well, Heba, thank you. We do love to wrap up our briefings with concrete calls to action that folks can take. I think that's a fantastic one, as is filling out surveys. I know you mentioned that one as well when we were prepping. If you're ever given the opportunity to fill out a survey and give a decision maker more accurate data that reflects your lived experience, I know they're a hassle. I know they're an eye roll. We get inundated, but people care about us and they want to know how they can help. So fill out those surveys, call your reps, and of course, continue tuning into SFI for next biweekly briefing. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another special guest and special deep dive issues, just to whet the appetite. But for now, Heba, huge thanks. Oh, and follow Heba online, please. She's got an awesome public page on Facebook with her Air Force employee title. Please follow her there. She gives great updates and resources. So thanks so much, Heba.
Thanks, Sarah, for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.